Nation. I'm Malika Ramsey. Thank you so very much for joining us this week. And of course, it is my pleasure to be here with you once again and I'm very, very happy because it is Friday, the first day of February in the year 2019. And it's a very exciting and jolly month for Guyana. Of course, you know, this is the month that every year we celebrate Mashramani, our republic. And this year it is 49 years. There is also a lot of other things happening in the month of February, even though it is not something that we specifically celebrate or observe in Guyana. Here it's also Black History Month. It's my birth month. It's the PNC's founder leader's birth month. So I get very excited about February, but nevertheless, I'm happy that you've joined me. It is also my pleasure to have on the program. This is not the first time he's coming on the program. It has been some time, and I always like to have a chat with the one and only Hamilton Green. He has so many former hats. Most of you will remember him whenever you see him in public as the former mayor of our capital. And, you know, he has done so much, and he is definitely a son of the soil, and it is my pleasure to have him back on Facing the Nation. Of course, it's my pleasure to begin our program for this month with Mr. Hamilton Green. Welcome to Facing the Nation, sir. Welcome back.
Thank you very much, Malika.
All right. It's so great to have you. And I started off talking to the viewers about the fact that we're in the month of February, where so many good things happen in the month of February. What does the month of February mean to you, sir, as a Guyanese who is we're in 49 years. Next year we'll be celebrating 50 years as a cooperative republic. What does all of this mean to you right now, sir?
Well, it's an opportunity for the Guyanese people to rekindle the spirit, the verve, the enthusiasm that existed in 1970 and more particularly in 1966. We came out of the typical colonial environment of imperialist domination, not knowing exactly what independence meant.
Okay.
49 years has been a troublesome, exciting, but also progressive period. That period can be characterized as the years and the time when one of our great leaders, I've always identified Cheddi Jacob and Forbes Burnham as our two nationalist leaders. Burnham is the man who turned Guyana around, made independence something that is meaningful.
Okay.
And when we moved in 1970 February to change our constitution from being just another colony and paying allegiance to Her Gracious Majesty the Queen, and to have a president that was all Guyanese, it meant that we were completely breaking the bonds that held us together, slaves and indentured laborers. And I hope and pray that on our 50th anniversary, we can find an opportunity for the leaders to come together and make a reality of what we professed of one nation, one people, one destiny. I've already spoken and written to both of our top leaders, and I hope that they would learn the lessons of our history and the world's history and use this opportunity to move forward. The world is full of examples when people deal with perceptions, and it has led to a lot of harm. We talk about 1914, I remember, as a young man reading about what happened in June of 1914, when the heir to the Austrian throne was assassinated in Bosnia by a radical. That led to the deaths of millions of people. It led to the Second World War. I say that to say to our audience and to our leaders, we need to learn human history and avoid the missteps we've made before. The time has come in Guyana for us to heal and to work together. I hope and pray that our two principal leaders, Barrett Jagdeo and David Granger, would listen to the voice of experience and reason and save this country at a time when we are sitting on massive wealth.
Okay. I really appreciate those sentiments, and I'm happy. I think, viewers, I think this is a perfect note to open today's conversation, today's discussions on. And I'm happy, sir, that you mentioned the fact that you have written to both leaders. The first thing I would want to do is, if you've gotten response from both leaders, and to put viewers, really to put the discussion into context. It's about everything that is happening, and I should let you know that the former mayor and myself, we planned to have this conversation a long time ago, way before December and way before No Confidence. But you know, they say the good Lord works in mysterious ways. He probably knew what was going to happen, so he was waiting so that we can get the former mayor's take on this. And of course, he's more than a former mayor, former prime minister, so many former things, but there are too many for me to mention on one program. But let's talk about that. The first thing I want to know, especially in terms of what is happening now, viewers, I like to remind you that we're not going to comment too much on the no confidence motion of itself, whether it's legal or not, because that is a matter in the court system, and you know, you have to be very careful how you talk about what is happening, matters that are in the court system. But sir, let's talk about everything that is happening now in terms of our current political climate, current political environment. And I'd like you to begin by saying if you have gotten whether formal or informal responses from whether it's in writing only or by speaking to what you call the country's principal leaders at this time, meaning the opposition leader and His Excellency President Green.
I've had no formal response. I've spoken to one of the leaders. At that time, he didn't receive the correspondence through some mix-up with the email system.
Okay.
But I expect them to give some cognizance to the content of my letter. The problem is that Guyana has hemorrhaged for more than a generation.
Okay.
If you look at the news over the past 24 hours, May's school, the top school of nations, that is a symptom of a moral decline in our society, which started a long time ago. When I was in high school, when I was in college, those things were unthinkable. I visited Stanislaus College to offer my sympathy to one of the reporter's daughter who died 10 years ago. And the teachers relate some horrifying, unbelievable stories of young men and women doing things almost in the open.
And this was 10 years ago?
No, this is...
You're talking about now?
No, I went to offer my sympathy to the girl who got killed 10 years ago.
Yes.
The daughter is now in Stanislaus.
Okay.
And the teachers were talking to me about their concern. You know, in 1991, I called for moral and spiritual revival, and some people thought it was a joke. It is something we need urgently in our society, because no matter what we do, unless there are rules of engagement, to know what is right and what is wrong, I suspect a lot of our leaders can't differentiate between good and bad, excellence and mediocrity. You talk about no confidence motion. I have not seen in the media the political aspect of it. The political aspect of it has to do with party politics. The PPP for some time had urged some legislation which would disallow members who swore allegiance to the party to just cross the floor, so to speak. What Charam Das did was to cross the floor in a sense. And the PP had expressed concern for years when the master blaster Forbes Burnham was able to win on his side. Some top PP leaders, the PP expressed concern about it. Ranjit Chandy Singh, Vincent Tika, the Lals, the chaps from over the river.
So in essence, none of this is new?
No, nothing. There's nothing new under the sun. My concern is that it ought not to be used to destabilize the government. It ought to be used as an opportunity to talk. There is the perception that Charan Das did something that is right. Only history will judge. The bottom line, he's a traitor. There's no question about it. in simple language, he's a traitor. The same way as Brutus was a traitor to Julius Caesar when he stabbed him, and Caesar said, et tu, Brute. The traitor in the same way the Rosenbergs.
On the note of traitor, how do you respond to some of them? There's a lot of talk, not only in social media, but generally, some people from, maybe the supporters, not necessarily their leaders, but from the PPP quarters, for example, at the beginning, some of them in terms of what they claim that was done for the sugar workers, some people were hailing Charandas, Mr. Charandas, the former MP, they were hailing him a hero. You're calling him a traitor. How do you respond to people who say, listen, this man did something that could possibly bring relief to sugar? Of course, viewers, you all know that's not my opinion, but how do you respond to people with those sentiments?
The sugar thing is an absurdity. I don't want to get into the detail, but the sugar industry was in a state of decline and confusion for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Sugar is very close to the Guyanese people. Sugar, all those canals, dams, and trenches on those estates were built by our slave ancestors. You know, the indentured laborers came, worked hard, they were not properly treated. So sugar is particularly important to us. And you couldn't have an industry that is on the decline for political reasons and not do something about it. Billions were spent in skill. The PP themselves started to downsize the sugar estates. So what Charandas said was nothing new. But he's a traitor because you are part of a group. And weeks before, he extolled the virtues of the group in the very parliament.
Mm-hmm.
And a hero couldn't be a traitor couldn't be a hero. But of course, you had the case of Lutkin, the man in Europe who betrayed the Allies, Quisling. In fact, his name is now in the dictionaries. Some people thought Quisling was a hero. The bottom line, he was a traitor. Judas kissed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver.
Mm-hmm.
He was one of the disciples. He was a traitor. He betrayed the group to which he belonged. So that you can't put a glorifying name on a traitor.
Mm-hmm.
What he should have done, if he wanted to have any history of decency, say, look, I am part of this group. I don't accept what you're doing. I'm going to leave.
Mm-hmm.
That is what Martin Luther did. Mm-hmm. Martin Luther was a traitor. He said to the Pope that, look, I don't agree with these things. He posted his things. He came out in the open. Martin Luther King Jr. came out in the open against apartheid in the U.S. system. So did Mandela. Those men came out openly, didn't hide and spring a surprise, as this gentleman did. So we need to be clear when we use these terms.
Okay.
And to know the benefit that will come out of it. They say, out of evil cometh good. I hope out of this, all sides will come to their senses. My concern is our young people. Our young people need to grow up in an environment where they see decency and morality. We've lost at least 2 generations. You saw it in the examples I gave a moment ago. So that December 21st will go down perhaps as a turning point in our country. Both sides need to know that the winner-take-all politics is not going to work. It didn't work since in the 50s. We thought it could work then. After the 53 elections, where we had unity, 6 ministers, Ashton Chase, Ayusi Kwayande is still alive, Lachman Singh, Forbes Bonham, Chetty Jagan, and Jaina Ryan Singh. They represented Guyana ethically, in terms of social bringing and so forth. Then you had introduced this nasty word Apanjat in 1956. so that the 1957 elections were tainted with race for the first time. We have not yet recovered from that.
Are we still tainted with race when it comes to elections, or is it, or do you believe that we have an ongoing race problem? Some people believe that it's an ongoing problem. Others believe that race issues only rears its head when there's something like an election, whether local government or regional general election. And of course, sorry to have to bring it up again, but former MP Mr. Charandas, because you started hearing nasty things coming from the two major ethnicities in our country, Afro-Guyanese and Indo-Guyanese. Do you believe it's ongoing, or these are the situations that sort of bring it back to the surface?
It was a germ and a cancer inserted in our psyche since colonial days. It's a long story. The Africans came here as slaves. They were completely destroyed as human beings, and their roots completely severed from their ancestors in Africa. That is why today you have people like Hamilton Green, George Gomes, Sidney Smith. They are not African names, but we carry those names with a degree of pride, if not folly. They're Anglo-Saxon names. Our Indian brothers, on the other hand, and Chinese, still carry their ancestral names with a sense of pride, and I say hats off to them. So that when in 1956, some person or persons trumped up this idea of race, what we did is open what was something we had kept quiet for years. I grew up in Charleston, All Boys Town. The problem then was a conflict between Hindus and Muslims, not black people and Indians. That was my background. My father had a drugstore, and every day he had to settle arguments between Hindus and Muslims because of what was happening in India. So that this thing is still with us. The young people don't want to talk about race. But I suspect when they go home and meet their parents and grandparents,
They hear it.
It becomes a reality. It's unfortunate. And I said to somebody the other day, maybe it's a pity Debbie Barker died. We need people of her vintage who can't claim to be Indo-Guyanese or Afro-Guyanese.
Yes.
Her father is Indian, her mother African, like my wife. And maybe we need to have some more Douglas to stop this nonsense.
But I think it's heading there because you already talked about the fact that some of our young people don't want to hear it. Viewers, if you're now tuning in, my conversation is with no stranger to Guyana. I don't need to say all of his hats, his current hats and former hats. Mr. Hamilton Green, he's immediately...
No, the trouble is that we're moving towards it, but we're not moving fast
enough. Okay.
Where people see others not because of the color of their skin and their hair. Some of the people I love most are Indo-Guyanese. Some Indo-Guyanese businessmen are decent people, but we seem to characterize them as being sharks. A lot of them are, but I know some very decent Indo-Guyanese people and simple Afro-Guyanese. Plus the mix, the Amerindians seem to want to get a space. Hats off to them. Let's have it.
Okay, all right, great.
But in my letter, I propose a national front government so that you keep the present structure in place, have a clean list, and whatever comes out, you have a cabinet that is proportionately balanced based on the results you get at that campaign. Then you set out clear rules so that whether you're a PPP, a PNC, or what, and you break those rules, whether it's financial or moral or what, out you go. There must be no protection of a person by the leader because he's an old member of the party.
So just so that, let's break it down so that people can understand clearly. Are you saying then that we should not have a political opposition, but then the opposition maybe should be, I don't know, maybe civil society bodies? Are you saying that?
Well, the word opposition is a bad word. A national front government means that all of the credible political parties will sit down and find a modus vivendi so that at the end of the day, the government, the cabinet represents truly the people, political terms, in social terms of this country. What we have at the moment is a razor-edge situation. The PNC win, you assume you're going to have an Afro-Guyanese president. The PP wins, you assume you're going to have an Indo-Guyanese president. And that is how it goes.
But wasn't the coalition designed to, especially the APNU coalition, of course I like to remind people that PNC is still a party, but it is the largest party in APNU with 4 or 5 other political parties. But wasn't the aim of a coalition government, a partnership, then a coalition government obviously with AFC, wasn't the aim to eliminate that, this PNC, black head, PPP, Indian head?
It was a noble effort. I think President Granger and those in the coalition ought to be complimented. My experience, however, suggests that unless you involve the two leviathans, the two giants, what you're going to have is almost a cosmetic operation. We've had experience all along. 1961 had a problem. When the PNC won, Burnham had a lot of very good Indians in key positions, Rampal, Shahabadin. Those were great people. Burnham didn't consider them Indo-Guyanese. He considered them Guyanese who can contribute to the well-being of this country. Even before we got the status of republicanism, we identified a man called Arthur Chung to be president, Chinese from a minority group. When we moved to Republican status in 1969, 1970, the person identified was Sir David Rose. Sir David Rose, I think, is a mixture of Caucasian and so forth, but a good Guyanese, an excellent police officer. Well, he got killed in 1969 and therefore never took up the post. The next person identified was Wanda Locus. But what the PP did is to identify an Afro-Guyanese as prime minister. Now, I don't mean to be disrespectful to my friend Sam, but he had no clout. It made no difference to the policies. We don't want that.
Window dressing, as you said.
We want a real powerhouse, a real power sharing. That's what we need to do.
Sir, is the PPP ready for that? And the reason I'm asking, the reason I'm saying PPP, because obviously they're the current opposition, and sometimes it seems that a lot of the venom, because, and you hear it from supporters on the ground, you are going to, you so want to get your hands in power, and of course people are talking about the fact that we're approaching the onset, well, it's more than the onset, but we're approaching first oil. There's so much venom coming because it seems as though you want to get your hands in power by any means necessary, that you're willing to go through whatever to use another member, unfortunately, who was a weak link in the APNU+AFC coalition government. He was a weak link. You're going to use that weak link because you feel that you must get power by any means necessary. I'm saying that to say, you're talking about a national front government. That is the title. Is the current opposition even ready for that? Will they? I mean, I know you're not in their quarters, in their halls, to know what's happening in their heads and in their party. But is that even possible with a party that seems to want to, if you're going to basically turn another member against its own government, pull the government down? Are they ready for that?
To honor my noble ancestors and to bequeath a good country to my children and their children, I hope that wisdom will prevail.
Okay.
I think what you said a moment ago is true. If not, it's a perception. The problem with human history is that perceptions often result in the action of people. If there's a perception that X is evil, no matter what he does. If a man went to prison and there's a perception he still steals, when he walks with a bag, the police think he has stolen goods. So perceptions are very important, and I think politicians need to recognize that perceptions are important. That is why I've written to the leaders. There's a perception that maybe a reality. The PP feels that LG demonstrates their might. They make a big mistake. They're not going to win the way they think. I know my people better than the new crop of politicians.
Okay.
And when people go back to their villages, Anns Grove, to Buxton, to wherever, they will remember their past and vote along those lines. That is why a national front government is what we need today. It's not going to be easy. It is not going to be easy. But I'm going to try to talk to people both at the lower level and the highest level to see if we can find some modus vivendi. Look at what is happening now. The PP have their tails up. Elections in 3 months. Not possible. I don't want it to get into matters which will engage the courts. But from my knowledge, I don't think GCOM is ready and can be ready. So what's going to happen? You have a crisis. For years, the PP has said the list has been compromised. It's the PPP who argued, even when we didn't want it, to move the qualifying age from 21 to 18. That was Jagan's big thing in the 50s and the 60s, because at that time he thought it would give them an advantage. Are you going to go to an important election and deny those young people who are now qualified because they're now 18 an opportunity to cast their vote? Is that what the PP is saying? But to do that exercise, you need 6, I suspect 9 or 12 months to do it. And there's no price you can put on emancipating democracy. So these are the imponderables we're faced with, and these are the issues I hope our leaders will remove the venom and the rhetoric and deal with. And to come out and say to the public, look, if I'm in office and John Jones or Susan McCrae or Balram Singh Prasad, my supporter, if he or she steps out of line, is caught taking bribe, stealing, getting involved in shady contracts, out they go. Both sides must agree on that. And that's the problem we have today.
Okay.
I know you can say what you like about Bonham and Jagan. Those two men never encouraged lawlessness in the cabinet, you know. Never.
I'm happy that you're saying that.
And
sometimes
I can testify to that.
we need a reminder. Just to pause a bit on what is happening currently in terms of politics and governance. You said something earlier that I find very interesting. You talked about the fact that you're a different politician, maybe not in so many words, but you're a different politician to the crop of politicians that we have now. I want to bring in the youth here. And the reason I'm bringing in the youth, because, and I ask almost every person about this, it has become rhetoric whereby youths are the future, we have to train them, they're not yet ready for leadership and so on. I want to ask you specifically, and this is for both government and opposition. Do you find that there are situations whereby there are young people not just being their faces out there on posters and talking, for example, I'll use myself as an example, you're just talking for your political party, but do you find that there is a situation whereby young persons are being actually understudying leaders in terms of preparing them to become either depending on what they want, either the type of politicians that our now leaders are, or even better politicians? Is that happening?
I couldn't give an informed answer. The impression I get is that neither of the major parties possess a cadre of youth people who are on the verge of taking over from the leaders.
Mm-hmm.
But there are two problems. 20, 30 years has done terrible things to this country. Our young people have seen what is happening and they become self-centered, if not selfish. I don't want to hark back on my time, but when I entered politics, I was a teenager. I made personal sacrifices. In 1961, I gave up my job to contest the elections. Are you seeing young people prepared to make that kind of sacrifice. When I became General Secretary of PNC in 1962, there was no salary to get. My mother and father supported me financially. Do you have young people today who are prepared to make that sacrifice? So it's two sides to the coin. But the leadership of the major parties have got to make a greater effort to reach out to young people, to be patient with them. Our young people need a chance to develop. But somebody's got to say to them, you've got to do it not because it's an entitlement because you're young, but you're prepared to work, and the key word, make sacrifices. A lot of our young people are in the mosques, the temples, and the churches.
Very true.
I have no problem with the theology that they preach, but sometimes it becomes a little too esoteric. The fact is, let us also do what we can. We are here on earth for 80, 70, is it 3 score and 10? I don't agree with that.
Yes.
I've just begun to fight. But we need to involve the religious groups to help us get young people to do things. It's a difficult one. I was in the courts yesterday and listened to some of the young lawyers.
Okay.
They're disengaged from the efforts of their elders, and all they want to talk about are the fees.
Well, you see, and I'm happy at this. You did say that your time was different. You did point that out very early, but it comes back to, most times indeed, it comes back to bread and butter issues. Life is much more difficult. You talked about the fact, and I love that, the fact that you would have been able to pick up and quit your job. You had your parents' support. But now what's happening, you have everyone in the household trying because their bills piling up. And then there's always this danger is, look, if it's only a few of us who have done that and have survived so far. But it's difficult now to ask a young person who maybe, let's say, would have a government job. Let's say, no, let me say government, let me say public servant, because they're thinking when the government changes, if the government changes at any time, and I'm not talking about specifically now, if at any time a government should change, I have to keep my job. Now, I can't go out there and be politically, to use the term that we use sometimes, politically stained. So I think, sir, that too is also sometimes difficult, and maybe it comes back to what you're talking about. Our leaders need to put things in place whereby you don't just go about and say, okay, you're PPP, this is APNU government, you're fired. And to give credit to this government, our president said at the beginning he's not into witch hunting. But now this leads me to another question. I'm not saying that we should have witch hunted, if that's the way to put it. At what cost do you leave people who are politically or have political allegiance to a previous party, and you come in now? What is the cost of doing that?
Malika, you raise a very complex issue. It should take hours to discuss. No, and find an answer. First of all, in some of the great democracies, you had what was called the spoils system. Okay. So if a government comes in, all of those public servants who supported the previous government offered their resignation. In the case of Guyana, we have a president who is very, very decent and straightforward. In fact, yes, I'll say so in public. Some thinks he's too decent. I mean, it's a strange thing to say. He's a good family man. He's morally correct. And I think we need to support him. Yeah. The problem is the environment. Granger didn't witch hunt, but he found in his own presidency people who not only supported the other government, but were in acts of dishonesty. Yes. What do you do then? That is why I repeat my proposal. A national front government with strict rules, written rules. Mm-hmm. So if you break those rules, out you go. There's no going to come a leader, going to come a general secretary. Mm-hmm. You've broken the rules, out you go. 5 years, as P.J. Patterson said in case of Buju Bantu, once people pay their price, either in court or a fine, they should be allowed to get on with their lives. Once people come and confess they did wrong, They say the vilest sinner can return. And with that in mind, don't disengage people because they did wrong. But they must know that they must be punished. The whole philosophy of Christianity and Hinduism and Islam, if you do wrong, in Christianity, you got a place called hell, a terrible place. If you do right, they got a nice place called heaven. But of course, as a little boy, they told me you get milk and honey. And I go and eat milk and honey and got diarrhea. And I say, I really don't want to go to that place. But that's the lighter side of the story.
I understand.
The principle is if you do right, you must be glorified and given a place of honor. If you do wrong, you must be punished. There's no question. If somebody does wrong, you must be punished. You can't have a society where children, and I see it happening now, do wrong things and they get a smack on the wrist. It's wrong. You know?
Indeed. I want to ask you directly, and viewers, if you're now tuning in, my conversation is with, again, the one and only Mr. Hamilton Green. We're talking governance to some extent governance, so we're talking the political environment and general, and I always like to have him on because we don't stick to one topic because he has a wealth of knowledge and I like to tap into it. So we're talking numerous things that are currently affecting our society, but more so in the realm of political and governance. I want to ask you directly. You talked about a national front government. You did say, obviously, this can't be achieved overnight. It can't happen next year. It may not even be able to happen in another 5 years or 10 years. While we're waiting on that to happen, what are your thoughts on the current administration? Why? This is the way I'm going to ask the question because everyone knows where I am. Why should the APNU+AFC government, which is already on the road because they're a partnership, they're a coalition, why should this government be given, to say given another chance makes it seem as though they have done the nation bad, which I don't agree with. Yes, there have been a few missteps and a few glitches, but why should the APNU+AFC government stay in power even after we go to an election, whether we go to that election this year or next year?
First of all, let me make it abundantly clear. I am a supporter of David Granger down to the end. I support PNC's part of me. Mm-hmm. I said publicly there's nobody alive who's made a greater sacrifice for the People's National Congress. I challenge anybody to name somebody. So my loyalty is not in question. Mm-hmm. My problem is that, like a family, like a church, we've had some people who have not done us well. Yes. And we have to face that fact. Mm-hmm. I pray for David Granger sometimes. I know what he is faced with every day. And it is unreasonable to expect a new government, to answer your question, in 2+ years to turn things around. You've got to, first of all, deal with the whole psyche of the society. Mm-hmm. The belief of get rich quick, that has saturated our society. So young people coming in, I mean, look what happened there. In my own family, I can call names. I have a daughter who came back from university and saw her friends within a few months driving big fancy cars. She said, Daddy, I mean, you got me tight. I can't do anything wrong. But look, those friends. So I warned her. I said, I'm going to always have a car in the house. You're going to always have a roof over your head. You're going to always get a meal. Don't do anything that is improper. The one who's a pilot came to me with the same problem. And in fact, a gentleman who crashed was on a flight that she should have been on because there was illegal running. I said, nothing illegal of any green, nothing. And how many families will do that? Exactly. I believe, I don't share your pessimism about 5 years. I hope within 5 years.
That we can, okay.
We can have, because, look, and I said this to one leader, This country is perched for greatness, or we can be damned. With oil coming on stream and less than 1 million people, with a good government, every Guyanese, at home and abroad, can be comfortable. I said with that oil money, education, health, recreation facilities, and to reintroduce a real national service. So those young men and women who were lost for the past 20, 30 years can be rehabilitated and make a meaningful contribution to our society. Bonham knew what he was doing when he introduced national service, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am hoping, praying, and begging through this media, our leaders to listen. Those who have not walked the straight and narrow path to straighten up and fly right. Now let me say this. No party is special. I've been this thing since '52. We all have rascals on both sides.
Yes. Yes.
The trouble is, some people encourage rascality, and that's my problem. I was at Central Housing and I saw what happened there. Unacceptable. But let's set rules. And let me say something. With money flowing, with a viable NIS, maybe I am wrong, and oil on stream, there's no need for anybody to steal. Whether you're top or bottom, you're going to have a proper meal. You have a roof over your head. You have transportation. You have health services. Why should you want to be greedy? Maybe I'm wrong, but that's how I see it. Some people have 2 cars, they want 4. You can't drive 4 cars at a time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're very correct.
Your system will provide that your children get a good education, so you don't have to steal to put aside for them. The state will provide them with education. You have to steal to put aside if they have the most complex cardiac health conditions. The state will have a hospital where they can go and be properly treated. You don't have to steal to get a holiday. Provision will be there for you to go see Kaitio or Remo, wherever, at a subsidized price. So why should you want to steal? And with oil on stream, that's what we can achieve in a very, very short time.
God forbid, and I'm going to go on the other side of this coin now. God forbid, again, while we wait on a national front government, hopefully the leaders become willing, hopefully the will becomes, it's sooner rather than later. What are the consequences, again, God forbid, a PPP government whenever the elections are called?
I'm not a Pigeon Island Brown. I have a man called Pigeon Island Brown. He knew what was going to happen tomorrow.
He knew what would happen, okay.
I don't have that sense of prognostication, and I hate to think of a government that is steeped, as all governments have been, in the winner take all. It ain't going to work. I think we should say to PP leadership, it's not going to work. I heard a statement by Barajagdo when he talked about elections. Let me make it clear. If either side pursue the path of punishing, depriving one group, the other group not going to fall asleep. So that in our own interest for peace and solidarity, let's work together and stop this nonsense about race. Maybe we need to produce a cabinet of all Douglas. That might be. I'll nominate my wife as one of the members and all the Douglas. But seriously, you know, things have become so bad. I found even when you have Douglas, people label them based on what they perceive.
What they see, if they look more like one than the
That
other.
look, whether they consider the black side or the Indian side as influencing their behavior.
Okay.
When I was at Congress Place as General Secretary during the crisis, a young man came to me in tears. He said, "Comrade, I'll go to my village at Anns Grove, and they said they're going to beat the Indian out to me. He said, I go to my mother's village at Louis-Savinier, and they beat me. They're going to beat the black out of me. It's a true story. We kept that boy at Congress Place for weeks. I don't know where he is today. But that is a description of our folly. And we need to get over it. On the other hand, we have people who have grown up in a society where they don't recognize race. Yeah. Frank Osborne, who was Debbie Backer's father, was an Indian, married to an Afro-Guyanese from one of our respected families, the Owens. He didn't know he was Indian. So when he had a crisis in Georgetown in the 60s, he walking down the street, and I saw some fellas going to him. I said, Frank, come in this car. You know what we look like? I
Wow.
tell you that to say that if people are allowed to grow up, they won't know what race they belong to. There's a famous story my mother told me in the United States of a white boy whose friend was black, but the friend was very good with his hands and so. And he would come and tell the mother about this friend, say Johnny. So the mother goes to the marketplace one day and somebody says to her, do you know your son's best friend is black? So she goes home to her son and says, you never told me Johnny was black. The boy said, Mommy, I didn't notice, I will look. It's a true story.
Wow.
Because as far as he was concerned, this friend
It's just a friend.
was a friend. And when the mother said to him he was black, he honestly said, I didn't notice, I will go tomorrow and check. We want to develop that, where people don't recognize race. Because the blackest person, the whitest person, can produce change. That's what God did, you know. All those races is marked, so people don't know how many races they possess. Because they don't want those fellas just doing the plantation.
Interesting. So, but you believe that? I mean, sir, it is always such a pleasure chatting with you as we approach wrap-up time, though. You talked a lot about the fact that you've reached out to our leaders, what you're expecting from them, and I mean, we still have a few more minutes, but you believe that if they set the example, the citizenry is going to follow. But again, while we wait on all of this to happen, what would you want to tell our citizens at this point? Again, at a time whereby we're still not yet sure whether it's 3 months, 4 months, 6 months next year, we're going to the polls. And as I did say earlier, there are some of us who believe that the race issues where they come to the surface when it comes to voting time. What would you want to say to citizens specifically at this time?
I will say if my dreams, my prognosis, my efforts don't yield fruit in the next few months or years, and you have to vote based on the character of the leader of that list.
Okay.
His track record. For me, there's no question that David Granger stands head above others in this regard. Like everyone, he has his weakness. That is why I propose and will propose that the next time the leaders, the parties meet, the two parties, they meet at the level of the leaders alone. So you don't have with you witnesses. Let them argue, let them consult one another, and let them find some ground that they can move forward the idea of working together. And not this cosmetic thing of an Indian president and an African prime minister or
For
Indian.
balance, for ethnic balance.
That is cosmetology.
I'd like your thoughts on this, though, because I do believe that is it not a form of, you said cosmetology, but is it not a form of racism to say, all right, so that we can have this, at least the look, the picture of ethnic balance. Let me put Hamilton Green here, and then I can bring, again, viewers, I'm just calling names here, Moses Nagamotu, just to give, isn't that a form of racism?
It is. It is a not so subtle a form either.
Okay.
And if you know Guyana's history, that's the problem Desmond Hoyt had. Because when he became president, and that's another story, he wanted to have an Indian to put on a face as his prime minister. But I was so powerful he couldn't shut me aside. That's one of the problems he had.
Okay.
People need to know the whole story. So when Jagan won, Jagan found an Afro-Guyanese as a front. Donald Ramatar identified an Afro-Guyanese woman as his next running mate. So that it is a form of racism, and it's a form of tokenism, which we need to get rid of. If the PP has the 5 top people in terms of competence as Indo-Guyanese, so let it be. If the PNC or the AFC have the 5 top as Afro-Guyanese or Doglo-Guyanese, so let it be. But they must govern, not taking into account their race, nor their religion. And that is the big question we can't answer.
Okay.
But that is where we need to go to our mosques, our temples, our churches, and pray that a miracle will happen to save this country.
Sir, it has been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank
Always
you.
happy to have you here on Facing the Nation. You always leave me with so much to think about, and it's amazing the amount of things that we have in common in terms of opinions. And I really take pleasure in that, because obviously we're from 2 different eras, so I get excited when...
Not eras, generations.
Generation,
Don't
sorry,
be afraid
yes,
to say
not
so.
eras. We're from 2 different generations. So it is always a pleasure when you can either agree with something I say, or I can either agree with something that you say. You wouldn't understand how much joy that definitely brings me. Thank you so very much for always supporting
My
Facing
pleasure.
the Nation. And thank you very much for being on program with us.
And to Guyana, peace. Peace, peace, perfect peace.
Thank you, sir. Viewers, this is Facing the Nation. We'll take a quick break. On the other side of the break, it will be time to wrap up today's program. Stay tuned. Thanks for staying with Facing the Nation. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for you this week, and this is where I have to bring the curtains down. Just a few reminders. Of course, MASH is the big thing that is happening this month, MASH Romani, and that means February is the party season. I know some of the events and the activities would have begun already, but I just want to remind you, in everything you do, try to be moderate, because you're here 2019 for MASH Romani. We want you to be here for 2020, and of course, you know, the celebrations for 2020 will be bigger, because of course that will be not just the year of itself, 2020, but the fact that then we will be celebrating 50 years as a cooperative republic. So whatever you do this year, ensure that you do it in moderation. And remember that when you get yourselves into trouble, when you do things like you drink and drive, you're not only hurting yourselves, but you're hurting innocent people. So please try to keep the partying to a manageable state. I'm not going to tell you minimum. I know some of you really like to go overboard, but keep it manageable. Ensure that everything that you do, you still sane enough to understand where you're waking up, where you're going, how you're getting there, and all of these things. It is also the month when most people celebrate love. That's the, which in really and truly, we should be celebrating love every single day. But people pay attention to it, more attention to it on the 14th of February. So there are lots of things happening this month, but I just want to remind you, in everything that you do, be moderate. You can enjoy things in a very responsible way. And of course, there is still a lot happening in terms of our governance and political environment, because there's so much push and pull, and we're hearing, you know, a whole lot of rhetoric. We heard some of the sentiments coming from the former mayor and former so many things, Mr. Hamilton Green. By the way, it is always a pleasure having him, and I'd like to take this opportunity once again to thank him very much for being on Facing the Nation today. As I said, that's all the time we have with you. Those of you who missed the conversation, who missed this entire program, you can tune in a little later on. It will be both on my YouTube channels and on my Facebook pages. As always, I urge you, be good Guyanese citizens. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other. I am Malika Ramsey, and this has been Facing the Nation.